Hello and welcome to Freedom from Fear, a German New Medicine podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Newberry.
And I'm your other host, Abigail Puccioni. Please be aware that nothing discussed here on this podcast should be taken as medical advice.
Consult your trusted professionals and your own inner knowing before making any health decisions. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Freedom from Fear. Today we have a special guest, and we are so excited to have Yerasimos on to dive into probably a bunch of topics, but mainly to focus on the idea of how to share your truth and stay in your lane, and also do it courageously. So we're glad to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So Yerasimos is the co-host of the Here for the Truth podcast and co-creator of the Rise Above the Herd coaching program. With over 20 years of experience, he helps people unlock their true potential through self-knowledge, conscious action, and radical self-responsibility. German New Medicine has been discussed several times on his podcast, and he will be one of the speakers at our upcoming GNM event, Paradigm Shift in Austin, Texas, this coming January. So welcome, Yerasimos. We're really excited to have you on.
I'm really excited. I love talking about all this stuff, and I'm excited about more and more people hearing this knowledge and living their lives with more self-responsibility.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So we are not going to be diving into anything specific about German New Medicine today. So this is going to be a slightly different topic than our usual, but I think that this will be really beneficial for all of our listeners really to hear, because I know that several of our listeners have shared certain things with us about, learning this new body of knowledge and being a little scared to tell other people in their life or to kind of radically speak their truth. And so that's what we are going to be covering today, along with, I'm sure we'll go on other, tangents as well. But yeah, Yerasimos, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your podcast and how you got started doing that? And because I know that you talk about a lot of things on there that are pretty against the mainstream, right? So just kind of how you got into doing that.
Sure. Well, first of all, I've always been curious about exploring different subjects and what's happening in this world, and beyond that, the external world, what's happening within myself. But to get more specific with how the podcast started, about what's this, 3.5, 4 years? No, 4 years ago, Sophie and I were invited onto the Unslaved podcast with two of my mentors, Michael Desarian and David Whitehead. I mean, they were my online mentors without knowing it. I just loved their platform. They had a huge impact on me, and I had reached out to Michael one day to share some information that Sophie found in her research for her dissertation that aligned with some of his theses and things he talked about. And so he then invited us to come on to the podcast to talk about these things. And for me, it was like I was a kid in the candy store. I was like, are you serious? I get to sit down for 90 minutes or more with these two individuals that have had an impact on my life, are truth seekers, are empowered beings, and live their life with integrity. And so we were interviewed in March of 2020, talking about awakening somatic intelligence and other subjects related to trauma. And then so invited back to speak there a couple months later as well. So twice in 2020. And then in 2021, I was on Instagram. And when you don't follow someone and someone sends you a message, it shows up in like the little requests folder.
Mm-hmm.
And I go in there and I check, I'm like, Joel Rafidi, who's this person? And so I look at his page and I go, oh, this guy looks cool. He's like a conscious hip hop artist. He's into divination. He was involved with the Sydney Freedom community. He had done a conscious hip hop track about vaccines. And so he messaged me saying, hey, your episode with your wife really had an impact on me. And so we continued a back and forth exchange just for a little bit. Just getting to know one another. And then we decided to jump on Zoom to meet face to face, kind of like what we're doing right now. And we realized we had a lot in common. And I had said something like, I've always wanted to do a podcast. He's like, I've always wanted to do a podcast. And we literally jumped on Zoom a week later, after maybe, I don't know, a few weeks of connecting with several messages on Instagram. And then, of course, that Zoom meeting. And we jumped on Zoom and we pressed record. And we started talking. And we just shared about what it means to walk an authentic path, to live your life according to your values. And then we did it again, a part two. And then we went, you know what? Maybe we should have guests on. And so we invited the first guest. And here we are, 217 episodes later, I'll get 3.5 years into this. And it's been incredible. And we cover a lot of subjects because we really want people to challenge the status quo externally and internally. We're not just some conspiracy podcast and like, let's talk about all the crazy, weird things going on. We have a few of those episodes, but really like, my motto has always been become who you were born to be. Each one of us has this unique spark of consciousness. We have these gifts, we have these tendencies, we have these innate desires that come from somewhere. And do you live according to them? Do you even know what you value? Or are you living out these conditioned lives based on mom, dad, culture, etc.? Yeah. And so, for me growing up, first generation Greek American, my parents had a pretty specific idea, like I should do this, like maybe be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. And that just didn't land with me. And yeah, I had my first post-college job, focusing on things that I went to school for. But then, at some point, this was like 20 plus years ago, I was like, this isn't for me. And I became my alternative path. And I started reading a lot. And I took savings and I traveled. And I gave myself a lot of time to reflect on what it means to even be a human being and to be here. And what is my purpose? And, that led me down a lot of different paths. And I picked up lots of different books that guided me and stimulated even deeper curiosity. Because, I didn't learn this in school, or my parents didn't teach me this. And yet here it is. Here are these scholars, here are these thinkers that are talking about these things that really landed with me. And so I just wanted to keep that process going. And from a health standpoint, my acting teacher, actually, my first acting mentor, that's something I did in a previous life. He gave me Dr. Carey Mullis's autobiography, Dancing Naked in a Minefield, in 2000. This was in 2005, I read it. And in there, he was challenging the HIV/AIDS paradigm. Now, not from like a germ theory standpoint, but just challenging the mainstream narrative. And I went, what? Wait, what is this? And even he was challenging the conventional narrative on like global warming. And so again, here's this person who has a Nobel Prize, who's in the mainstream talking about these things that you don't hear. And so for me, I went, okay, what else is there? And so I wanted to keep learning. I wanted to keep studying and talking about these kinds of things. And so anyways, to come back to Joel and myself, we wanted to have these different kinds of conversations that challenge people's ideas on what it means to be a human being and what's going on in this world. So I don't know, there's something innate within me. Of course, the first time I posted something on Facebook 15 years ago and I got yelled at and people were coming into my DMs, like it doesn't feel great. You're like, like you have to deal with that pit in your stomach. You have to deal with butterflies. You have to deal with, people don't like me. I mean, many of us are raised to be people pleasers.
Yeah.
It's just part of culture. And so how do you navigate that? And are you more willing to honor this authenticity within yourself, or continue to conform and go along? So, I mean, I could keep talking and talking and talking on this stuff, but I'll stop there.
Well, we're all talkers here, so. Yeah, I love that. And it's funny that how you guys got started with the podcast, because it's similar to how Abigail and I got started. Which is funny. But I love
following that thing within you. You follow it. Do you trust it? You get a call, you answer that inner call. And do you ignore it? You ignore it, and do you ignore it? Or do you go, this is what I'm doing? And then when you make that choice, when you make that decision, what comes from that? What people come into your life? What opportunities present themselves? That's when the magic of life happens, or God comes into the picture, whatever you want to call it, that when you follow that inner truth within yourself, that deep down in your bones, is the next step to take in your life, what unfolds and what manifests from that. And I have countless examples of the magic just happening, the right person coming to my path, getting a phone call, getting an email, having this serendipitous conversation on the side of the road. Like it's pretty incredible when you do follow that inner yearning within.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
I had a mentor tell me once, I think that this was either Steve or Melissa actually, but when the price of not doing something becomes greater than the price of doing it, if that makes sense. Like the price of, or I guess, yeah, the price of not doing something would need to become greater than the discomfort of um, doing the thing. So like speaking out, you have to get to the point where you it's more harmful to you to continue not doing it
Right.
than to actually start doing it. So I think everyone has to find when they're at that point of like, okay, it's actually more painful for me to continue and not doing this thing.
Yeah, I think it's a paraphrase of a Tony Robbins quote, like the
Okay.
pain of where the pain of not changing is greater than the pain of changing, or vice versa, whatever that is. That causes you
Yeah.
to change. And so this is
Yeah.
what I think it's important to be able to feel reality. And so many people are self-medicating in the myriad of ways in our culture that distract you and support you in your self-medication and self-soothing and escapist tendencies. But can you actually feel the pain of your reality, of the choices that you've made or haven't made, and go, oh, like this is real. Like I have this desire to shift and change, and I'm not doing it. And then at some point, I think for many of us, that pain becomes too great. And it's like, let me, like, I have to change, because not changing is just too much for me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Um, and I think to follow up with that, that questioning and actually following your inner truth, for you personally, has that been um like a theme in your life before the podcast and before like doing this more publicly? Or was there like a tipping point in your life where it was like, okay, I need to follow more of my own path than what was kind of set out before me?
Well, yeah, it's like I briefly touched on earlier. I kind of just like went along to go along. I mean, academics and school was pretty kind of easy for me. I just did the thing and got the grade, and it was like, okay, cool, let me go to college. But then living away from home and being in my own environment, it was like, oh, wow, look at all these people that I'm meeting. I went to school in Boston, like an urban environment. I'm meeting people from all around the world. There's life outside of Wayne, New Jersey. You know what I mean? You start
Yeah.
like, wow, what else is out there? And then I studied abroad, and I was in Australia for 4 months. I'm like, there's a whole place on the other side of the world with people doing things and people traveling for 2 years. I'm like, wait, you can travel for 2 years? Like you can just take your savings and backpack? Like that's a thing? Like we're not taught that in our culture. So all these things like started stimulating more and more curiosity within me. But I just, again, when you start reading and you start questioning, like I started speaking out a little bit. And from a friendship and family standpoint, back to your original question about speaking truth, you have to be willing to disappoint people. You have to
Mm,
be willing
yeah.
to disappoint and challenge people's projections of you and their expectations of you. And if you're not
Mm-hmm.
do that, you're going to stay the same and things are going to remain stagnant. And so do you have the self-esteem, which is a subject that, Joel and I talk about often, to navigate this, to assert yourself, to speak out, and to deal with what comes up? And even with like a lot of the nervous system work that I do and that I'm into and Sophie's into, it's like, do you even have the capacity to handle that when someone says you're a baby killer because you make a post about vaccines or something? Like, can you deal with that within your own system and have the courage to keep going and realizing the more you live off, the
Yeah.
more you speak your truth, people may fade away, but then what does that open up? And what amazing human beings come into your life?
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier briefly germ theory, and then you just mentioned vaccines. And so last month we had Mark Gober as the special guest on our podcast for a two-part series, all about contagion. I know you're friends with Mark. So if you could walk me through the process of your own journey with dismantling germ theory and kind of coming to terms with that, because I feel like that, for one, is going to be a really relevant example for our audience specifically, but I think that you can draw from that and maybe the process that you approached that, both for yourself and then kind of coming out about it, if you will. So yeah, just kind of walk us through that process, because I know that that can apply to several other things too. But let's just use germ theory as an example.
Sure. Well, like I mentioned earlier, I got really hip to the HIV/AIDS thing in my mid-20s. And I went, are you kidding me? Like this incestual relationship between like government, media, the scientific establishment. So my first foray into, let's say, truth seeking or challenging a lot came through the health kind of lens. And that's when I started studying health and going down different avenues around that. But it wasn't really until 2020 that I really started challenging germ theory. I mean, there might have been like I always had this part of me. I don't know where it came from, because my mom was like a little bit of a germaphobe. Like I don't say like a hardcore germaphobe, but when I would drink out of like my brother's water glass, she would like give me shit. No, drink the water, okay? She'd give me shit. And I'm like, I'm fine. And I never worried about germs, but I came at it from a place of, I know this is going to sound silly, but like I had this inner belief system that I was Superman, and like no germs are going to mess with me. Like I'm fine. It's okay. I could sit on a toilet. Like I could sit on a public toilet and not have to put down like tissue paper. Like I wasn't that person. I was just like, I'm fine. But I didn't, at that point, I didn't have the education to challenge germ theory. It was just more like, okay, like I'm going to live my life. Like people have lived for a long period of time dealing with this kind of stuff. But in 2020, because I was posting a lot on Instagram, especially my stories, I was like a story maniac in 2020, and I was on the front lines of the meme wars. I one of my friends was like, "Hey, you should join this like private Telegram group called Free Thinkers." And it was, a lot of people that were speaking out at that time early on, like different doctors, other, I hate using this term, but like influencers that were speaking out on the COVID narrative. And so I was in there. I wasn't really active, but I'd go in there occasionally and see like what people were posting. And Melissa was in that Telegram thread. And she may have posted something, or maybe we connected on Instagram, or forget how it happened. And I'm like, German new medicine? Like, wait, I've been in the health game and curious and have been exposed to a lot of different things. What is this? And so this is where, again, I trust my intuition. Like, I might have read like 2 paragraphs on a website, maybe the Learning GNM website. I'm not sure. And I immediately went, yep, truth. This is it. But not this is it. Like, I'm not a very dogmatic person and go like, this is the only thing. But I was like, this is deep. And especially someone with a psychological foundation. Like I studied consciousness. I realized like, okay, like our state of mind has an impact on how we move in the world and on our health. And so here was something for me that came across as extremely specific, extremely nuanced, extremely holistic, and scientific. And I was curious. And so through that, Telegram thread, and then at that time, Melissa and Steve lived about 2.5 hours away from us. We kind of stayed in touch. And then Sophie and I were hosting these gatherings, in 2021, these freedom gatherings where we were bringing people together that were challenging the narrative, and we're okay with like hugging each other and not wearing masks and all that. And so Steve and Melissa came to a few of them, and we got close. And of course, through these conversations, we're geeking out. We're talking about this stuff. And I went, this is dope. This is like really amazing, powerful stuff. And at that time, Joel and I had started our platform May of 2021. And so we started having different types of conversations. And because I thought this knowledge was cutting edge, even though it's been around for 40 years, or whatever, however many years, I was like, we need to have a conversation on this. Like, I consider Here for the Truth like the alternative to the alternative. Like, we explore certain conversations and certain subjects that I think are at the cutting edge, personally. That's my opinion. And so when I met Melissa and I saw how she was communicating online, very clearly, very, very articulately, with passion. Joel and I were like, let's do this. And so we started our first episode with her. I don't know when it was. I think our first episode was episode 23. So pretty early on in the podcast. And then we continued pulling at that thread, and we wanted our audience to be exposed to this stuff. And they were. I mean, we've had people who first heard about GNM from our podcast with Melissa have gone on to study and now, teach this stuff, over the last few years, or consult with people. And that's pretty incredible and pretty amazing. And, to play our part to whatever degree that we have in supporting people to become free from the fear around symptoms. Like, I'm so grateful. Like, it can bring tears to my eyes sometimes, because this is what gets me, is like, there's like this self-righteous part of me that looks at the world and looks at how we've been lied to, and the amount of people that have been hurt, the amount of suffering that is existed in this world because of ignorance, because of misinformation, because of a whole host of reasons. Like, just think about the children, think about the relationships, think about people diagnosed with cancer and their loved ones passing away. Like, are you kidding me? Like, and so I feel like I'm not doing my part as a man, even in this world, as a protector, as a leader, to support people to get a hold of this knowledge and to embody it and to incorporate into their lives. So, again, I went on a roundabout way to answer your question, how I kind of started breaking down the germ theory BS. And it was early in 2020 when I came across this knowledge that made more sense than anything else I had come across.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about truth seeking and truth speaking, do you have the capacity to challenge your beliefs? Do you have the humility to think, maybe I don't know everything? In the history of the world and the people and the knowledge and the wisdom. And in my brief 20, 30 years and going through the academic system, maybe I don't know everything. And so do you have that ability? And I feel like I do, and I have, and that curiosity and that desire to investigate has guided me. And so, reading through the 5 biological laws, I was like, oh yeah, cool, this makes sense. Oh, biological law number 4, talking about microbes. Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. And personal experience. And I won't get into all that here. I'll probably talk about more of that in Austin, but I just had many personal experiences that just solidified it. And so people can tell me that I'm crazy. They can say, no, we've isolated in the scientific establishment, blah, blah, blah. And I go, well, this makes more sense because I had personal experience of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was it, early in 2020, and then it just kind of kept going from there. And
yeah, I love that. And honestly, I think that's the beautiful thing about following your inner knowing and following your intuition and trusting it, and paying attention to it, right? And having enough kind of space or quiet in your mind to even kind of hear that still small voice, instead of, like you were mentioning earlier, right, all these cultural norms of numbing and kind of being awake, but you're kind of sleeping and just kind of going through the motions of life. And yeah, and I love that it made sense to you right off the bat. And that was also my experience. And coming from my nursing background, I quit nursing 6 months after learning German new medicine, because I was like, oh no, I can't do this. So
yeah.
Well, I love that it made sense to you.
Yeah, and how much discomfort and inconvenience are you willing to live with to stand up for your values and your convictions?
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of life. And even when you think about whistleblowers out there, it's rare. It's rare for people that are hardcore in the system to go, hey, I've just invested 20, 30 years into my career. I've made a lot of money. I've built a reputation. I'm willing to burn it all down, especially in the system that we have with censorship, and character assassinations and articles and 24/7 news media. I'm willing to just go, you know what? The truth is more important.
Yeah.
And so, are you willing to stand by the truth is more important? That being said, I think we all have a role to play. Not everyone's here to have a podcast. Now everyone here is here to scream from the rooftops. Okay. And I think one of the things that's really important and is a big piece of the work that I do is each individual needs to go deeper in knowing themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They really value and how they want to express those values in the world. Maybe you're just educating your families and your children and your children about GNM.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you don't need to talk about it at the coffee shop and scream from the rooftops. Like, you're not doing anything wrong if that's not your role to play.
Yeah.
We all have different roles to play. And I think that's why we get into this, especially with social media. Oh, they're doing this. I'm not doing that. Something's wrong with me. Now, if you're not doing anything, then you got to take a look in the mirror. But like, if you're like solid with what you're doing and how you're sharing it and what's important to you, then great. You know, you don't need to post on social media. But if a part of you does want to, but then another part is like, what will people think? What will your friend from fourth grade think that you haven't talked to in 25 years? You know,
Yeah.
So real.
it's like so funny. People that we have no relationship with, but that are on our social medias lurking, or maybe even not lurking. Those are the people that most people are worried about like, offending. Or so I don't know. Like, you just have to be willing to be more fully yourself.
Yeah. So with this term truth and finding your truth, finding the truth, I guess something important to touch on is your definition of truth. And also, not to turn this into like a super philosophical discussion, but with
Too
relativism,
late.
like do you believe that there is an absolute truth, or that we each have our own, relative truths? Is there a truth that applies to absolutely everyone? Kind of, I don't know, share a little bit on your thoughts around that.
I mean, I think there's something called objective reality, you know, that we all look at the world and like, oh, water is wet. We use words to describe things. You know, we look up, the sky's blue. You know, there's certain things that I think objectively we can say are true based on our shared experiences. Um, Now I also believe there's something called subjective truth. But to what degree? Like, does subjective truth or your emotional response to something um you know, supersede objective truth? No, I don't think so. But when I speak about my truth, I go, hey, my name is Yerasimos. I'm an individual. I know that I'm an individual. I have this experience of being an individual, even though I'm part of a collective. And I have certain values and certain gifts and certain things. Like, it's my truth. Like, I like playing backgammon and table tennis occasionally. You might not. And so my truth is that I enjoy these things. But if I'm here to say, be like, well, you know what, you're a narcissist and that's my truth, and but it has no basis in actual like reality. Like, sorry, like, you've taken the crazy pill. Like, that doesn't supersede, what is true. You know what I mean? So like, again, it's hard to explain. Like, at some level, there are things happening in this world where there is truth. We may not know it, especially at things that we're conversing about in the world, like what's really happening on this planet. What role do politicians have? Like, who runs this place? Like, what is going on? Like, we want to move closer towards figuring that out, but no one person is probably like, oh, I know it 100% what's true. So I think there's like a subjective truth and a objective truth in that regards. But I get it with relativism, and it's like, it's my truth. Like, okay, but that doesn't supersede like a rationality and the use of reason to come to certain conclusions. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. I like that explanation.
Um, yeah. What's next, ladies?
Go ahead, Abigail.
Okay. So I was waiting for you to
I know.
talk next, but okay, give me a moment. Okay, so for a lot of people that are thinking about sharing GNM on their platform in some capacity, or fill in the blank with whatever you feel led to share about, but there's some fear there because you're afraid of how people might respond. What was it, the friend from fourth grade that you haven't seen in however many years? How can you find I guess, a sweet spot of sharing where you are remaining true to yourself and, sharing, like you were just describing, objective truth and, sharing about, if that's GNM, for example. However, I do think that there's a certain point to which we can get really caught up in I don't know if it's needing to be right, but where we are, and I don't even want to say like forcing our beliefs on others, but I think it's really important to be cognizant of how and why are we sharing? Are we sharing because we feel genuinely called to, or is it this, oh, I want to prove them wrong and I need to tell every single person in my family and I need, whether they want to hear it or not. And the whole, from the Bible, the throwing pearls to swine kind of thing. Like, am I putting so much of my time and energy into really trying so hard to like convert everyone to the truth that, where I guess, where is that line? Like, how have you found a balance, a sweet spot in your life for sharing without, I guess, not even giving too much of yourself away, but I think you know what I'm kind of
I
referring
do.
to, where you're like going a little overboard.
I do. Well, you're not going to know what that line is until you start.
Until you cross it.
Until you cross it. But like you have to start somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And then life is this ongoing process of growth and evolution. So I think for many of us, we learn these things and we like, I remember in my 20s, like I turned into the food police. Like, oh, you're drinking Red Bull. How dare you drink Red Bull? Why are you doing that? And you just learn. Like it's this process of life is like you have internal experience and reflections, and then you go out into the world, and then you get data from the external world, and then you come back and you go, oh, that's interesting. Like, how do I respond to this data, and how do I evolve and grow from this? If you're an individual that cares about deep personal reflection, personal development, and growing and evolving and knowing yourself, this is what happens. And what is the state of your psychology? How emotionally intelligent are you? How consciously do you communicate? Like, you may trip up. You may like get triggered and start yelling at people and get into this argument online. Like, but you have to go through this process. You don't just wake up one day, never posting online, and then go, now I'm the Zen master. I'm emotionally intelligent and super conscious, and I shall communicate perfectly. You're not. You're gonna like share one thing, and then someone, that fourth grade person, is gonna come in and be like, "Oh my God, you're anti-science," or whatever, and then you gotta go, ooh, what do I do? Are they telling other people about this? Like, are they sharing it with their friends? And at some point, you got to be like, I don't care. I deeply believe in these things, and I want to share them. But you have to go through the process, and ultimately, to go back to what you initially said, like, if you're thinking about doing this but haven't yet or is scared, and I'm going to go straight towards something that is pretty blunt, but in some cases is a spiritual practice for me. And it is called memento mori. Remember, you will die. You're going to die. We are all going to die. And by knowing that it can happen at any moment, how do you choose to live your life? And so you want to keep living your life knowing like, oh, next week. Oh, no. In 2 years from now, I'll do the thing. And no, then I'll have the conversation with the person that like I've been wanting to have this conversation with. Like, what are you waiting for?
Yeah.
How do you, when that moment comes, right before that moment comes, whether it's tomorrow, whether it's in 50 years from now, surrounded by your loved ones, how do you want to feel? Do you want to feel like, hey, I gave it my all and I honored myself and I spoke truth to the best of my ability?
Yeah.
Or live with regret after regret after regret?
So going back to that fourth grader example real quick, just to ask you how this is currently going in your life, do you feel like, say, getting that kind of comment from that, fourth grade friend that's like, oh, you're anti-science or whatever, do you find that the more comments you get like that you start to care less and less, and it's a bit of a desensitization thing, or is that always there? Is that discomfort always there? Or have you actually progressed in the not caring? Because I know a lot of people, it's like easy to say, oh, just don't care about it. But it's like, how's your process for actually getting from point A to point B of not caring so much what other people think?
Well, I'm oversimplifying. Obviously, there's a part of me that cares. I want to communicate diplomatically, and that's happened over time. Like, I feel like I have to check myself. Where am I coming from? Am I coming from this? I want to go over the head with knowledge. If I want to Or do I
Yeah.
want to maybe stimulate some curiosity within you, or ask questions instead of like make definitive statements coming from a really charged place? And so it's happened over time. When I was sharing things even before 2020, and people would come into my Facebook feed, and I'd spend like an entire day arguing with people. And I'm like, what am I doing? Like, so at some point you go like, I just wasted 10 hours, like having back and forth conversations with someone. And both people, myself included, are just like there to hear themselves talk, or type, and then obviously hear themselves type and talk in their mind. You know what I mean? Like, and then the person's doing
Yeah.
the same thing and it goes nowhere. And they're like, I just wasted 10 hours of my time. So supposedly, I think maybe I didn't waste it because I learned from it. You have to put yourself on the battlefield. You have to go through this. You have to experience what that's like for people to judge you, and then for you to feel what's happening inside you and your nervous system. And it's like, ooh, that doesn't feel right. And then like, I don't know. I think I posted in 2020. I started posting more on my stories, not as much in my feed, because I was like, the people that want to look at my stuff, they can look at my stuff, and I'll share. I lost friends. I lost lots of friends in 2020, but I was fortunate
Yeah.
because I'd been speaking about different things like this for, I think, a bit. I had a crew of friends that were, alternative researchers or quote unquote conspiracy theorists. And so I didn't feel I was alone. And at that point, like over time, you're building self-esteem. You know yourself on a specific deep level. So I'm like, I'm doing what I'm doing. Like if people don't like it, they don't like it. I like me. I like
Mm-hmm.
myself. I look in the mirror and I'm happy with the man that I am. Not all the time, obviously, we're complex, but generally speaking, I'm content with that. And then the people in my life, my real friends that love and respect me, like that's fine. I'm not here to satisfy everyone. I'm not here
Yeah.
to convince everyone. Honestly, don't even care at this point. Like I have a platform with Joel. We do what we want to do. We have conversations that we want to have. And if people want to listen to them, great. If they don't, I don't care. Like there are enough people that do. And so I focus on the things that really matter in my life, and like building what I'm building with Joel over the last 3.5 years, building the relationships that I have, beautiful friendships where we respect each other's individuality. As far as for everyone else, I wish them well. Like you do you. If you're cool with letting me do me and what I want to do, then we're good. I don't need to convince everyone. But again, like you don't just get there. Like it's a process.
Mm-hmm.
Even when we talk about health, like how many of us are like, oh, I shouldn't have sugar. I got to read every single thing. And oh my God, EMS. Oh my God, my light, like everything. I'm going to go crazy. I got to tell everyone about it. To like, you know what? I'm going to do what I can, mitigate what I can mitigate. And then like, I want peace in my life. I want peace. I want harmony. I want to focus on the things that bring me joy and not just live in this combative relationship with others and within myself, because that's not healthy. So
Yeah.
But you have to start. You have to take the step in. You got to dip your toe in the waters. You got to share the little post, and I think people are gonna, respond how they respond. And who knows? Now, even with the algorithm, I'm curious. People see things, and maybe you're just preaching to the choir most of the time. I don't know. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
what kind of relationships do you want? Do you want these relationships where people don't want you to be yourself? Like I have like I would rather, there are people in my life that don't agree with me around things around health and maybe vaccines. And I would rather spend time with them than some of these crazy truthers. They're like, they might know certain things, or maybe they don't, maybe believe in germ theory, but like they just live in this world of like, oh, everyone's out to get us and everyone's out to lie to us and everything's fake. And I don't have time for that. Like I want to hang out with like good, loving people. And sometimes those people just don't share the same exact values as me. So like discernment.
Yeah, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm. Would you say that your relationship to your values then, or for someone else, like a friend, that their relationship to the values that they have is more important than the values themselves?
Can you say that again?
That what you were just describing with different friends and like, the intense truthers that maybe are on the same page about certain beliefs, but then It's the way that they're relating to it. So it's more the relationship with the values as opposed to the values themselves.
Yeah, I agree. And you're dealing with a whole person. So there's levels to this. Like in 2020, I was more likely to like speak at people. Like it was a different time. Like I live in California. I wasn't allowed to go into restaurants. So I felt like I was like, there was like a war against me. So I was much more defensive at that time. It was like, you're not doing this to me. I'm stopping myself from cursing. So that's good. You're like, no, like I'm not going to be treated this way. It felt like I had to like raise up like my sword and fight back and speak in a certain way. I just don't care that much about that anymore. Like that was appropriate for the time, but it's not now. And I don't need to go online and make fun of people wearing masks and be like, oh, germs aren't real. I can't believe you're wearing a mask, idiot. Like, I don't care. Wear a mask if you'd like. It's just, if I don't have to wear a mask, then I'm not going to wear a mask. But if we get to a point where it's like there's mandates, and then we'll see that sword might need to come out. But generally speaking, I'm cool with people living their life how they want to live it. You're free to make whatever choices you want to make. And I just want that for myself. And so then I'm focusing on what I'm building and what I'm creating. And as opposed to who am I arguing against and who am I fighting and who am I trying to convince that I'm right, which most of the time is coming from a deep insecurity of like, oh, they need to understand me. Like, and a lot of times it's even coming from you're not really secure and grounded in what you believe. Like I think if you really are solid, grounded in what you believe, if someone disagrees with you, you're like, okay, you're free to disagree with me. Take care. Have a great day.
Yeah. It's a much different response.
This is different.
Yeah.
But again, practice, speaking out and dealing with what comes back at you. You're not going to know until you do it. You make that post. And it's going to be messy at first. But that's growth. That's how we evolve, not just by staying stagnant and sitting around twiddling our thumbs and having all these dreams and wishes that we don't take action on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd love to kind of dig a little bit deeper just for our listeners and then your experience with that, making a post or saying something. Have you found that through your experience of sharing your truth and caring a lot less about, random people on the internet, that want to pick a fight with you? Have you found that through that experience that maybe certain people in your, in-person life with friends or family, that because you're not trying to argue or convert them, have you noticed people kind of maybe coming back to you if there was any kind of fighting or stuff between like during 2020? Or I guess, have you noticed like a shift in your in-person relationships since you've been practicing this way of sharing?
Well, I definitely noticed lots of shifts if we're talking about like from 2020 to now or even 2 years ago. Like I feel like people distance themselves from me. But then I noticed like 2 years in or 2022, 2023, more people started liking on certain posts. And you're like, have you realized certain things? Or maybe you realize like the world wasn't ending and that I wasn't out to kill everyone and your grandma. And then they like kind of snap out of the trance a bit and go, wait, like I know this person, I know their heart, I know who they are. And I had one main experience of this that was so deep and powerful. I had a dear friend of mine who definitely got like kind of taken into the COVID narrative. I think like April of 2020, I saw him down by the beach, and he was like standing like 10 feet away from his girlfriend at the time, and he wouldn't even elbow pound, and it was like, oh, okay, man, like cool. And then like we got on a Zoom like a month or two later, and he's like, hey man, I had to stop following you, because of the things you were posting, and a lot of his trauma came up, and a lot of his fear and a lot of the stuff from his childhood. And so like on some level I understood it, and we kind of lost touch for a year or two, a couple years actually. And then when I started posting more about the podcast and actually started posting on Facebook again, because I kind of like stopped. Facebook was like just madness. I kind of like left it for a couple years. I thought it was just like an insane asylum. I saw that he was liking some posts on my podcast. Now, maybe they weren't specific to like health stuff, but other things talking about. And so I reached out to him and I was like, hey man, you haven't visited us since we moved to where we moved, our new home. Like, why don't you come up? And so he's like, yeah, why not come up? And so he came up and I didn't know what to expect. Was he going to show up at, our front door wearing a mask? And he wasn't. And he gave me a big hug. It's like, okay, I gave him a little tour of a place. And then we ended up in the kitchen and like the conversation came up. He's like, hey man, I just want to let you know, like 6 months ago, I stopped watching the news and I started doing some like trauma work. I remember he was into sports. He's like, I remember, I was on like Sports Center or something, and one of the basketball players was being interviewed on why he didn't take the vaccine. And he's like, well, I was raised holistically and all this stuff. And then my friend's like, huh, I mean, shut up. You were always that way. You've been talking about this stuff in the pharmaceutical company for like 10, 15 years. Man, I came to your wedding. Like, you're my boy. Like, you're my it's like not having the news media and the programming and not watching that, and then also doing the work necessary to heal some of your wounds and get more balanced. Like the mind control kind of dissolved away. And he's like, wait, this is a human being that I love and I care about and I respect. And so we're sitting there across from each other, like I'm tearing up and he's tearing up about this I don't know, love that we have for each other. And we're able to align and connect in other ways. Even to this day, like he's not fully aligned with my views on health. Maybe there's some other stuff socially and things happening in the world that we can align with more, like sociopolitically. But it's like, man, I love you, dude. And same coming from him. And like, we don't need to agree on everything. But there was this beautiful reconciliation that happened. I had another reconciliation with a friend too, that we didn't talk for a couple of years. And, we got on Zoom for like a 3-hour call and, we had to talk about some stuff. But for many, it's like, they just move on and they just like, they're not going to come back and go like, hey, maybe things weren't as dangerous and scary. Maybe we were lied to. I'm sorry I unfollowed you, or I'm sorry that like I probably talked to mutual friends of ours and went like, Yerasimos is kind of like off the deep end, which happened. And it's okay, because like I said before, I'm cool with who I am and the choices that I've made in my life and the relationships that I've built. I'm not here to satisfy everyone, and the most important person to satisfy is yourself. You need to love yourself, respect yourself, honor yourself. Everything starts from there. If you sacrifice yourself and ignore yourself, because we've been taught in our world that value comes only from what we do for others, not just for the fact that you exist as a breathing human being. And what does that mean? This is why the things that happen in this world happen, because we're educated, even religiously in a lot of ways, to sacrifice ourselves. And I just think charity starts at home. You got to take care of yourself and your heart and your mind and give from the overflow. But if you're not honoring yourself, then what comes from that? What seed is planted?
I love that. That's a fantastic story. Thank you for sharing. So on that topic, I feel like in our culture today, there's so much, not even, I want to say like radical thinking, but not even that. It's more this mass generalization that occurs when, I don't know, say someone, you're, I don't know, against vaccines or something. It's like, oh, well, then you hate all babies. Or, if someone voted for this person, well, don't, I don't know, support the existence of this entire group of people, or, whatever it is, right? There's a lot of really big kind of sweeping statements that get made. And I feel like attached to that, there is this idea that you must be like, it doesn't matter what your truth is, or being authentic and staying true to yourself, but it's more, you owe it to the collective. I mean, I guess we can get into a little bit of a conversation around individualism versus collectivism and however you want to take this. But yeah, I feel like I don't see a lot of people that truly have the belief that you don't have to agree on everything to have a healthy relationship. I feel like more and more people are using the fact that maybe you don't align on one particular thing, right? That you disagree on one thing, and then, oh, can't be friends with them because that's against what I stand for. And, so even if you agree on all these other things, they focus on the one thing that you don't agree on. And it's like, oh, well, I can't be friends with that person because they blah, 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 fill in the blank. And it's this big generalization that's usually not even true. But I guess, yeah, kind of speak on that a little bit culturally, what you think is going on in terms of this really almost like you are responsible for the good of the collective, right? Like like, oh, well, you need to be a good person and you need to value doing the right thing for everyone, where there's almost this, I don't know what the term for this is, but um, yeah, this, I was going to say virtue signaling, but that's not what I'm talking about here. More this, I don't know, like virtue accusations that get thrown around.
Yeah, I mean, collectivism, individualism. I plan on talking a little bit about this in Austin for sure. But again, it's like it is collectivism versus individualism. And we interviewed G. Edward Griffin a couple years ago on the podcast, which was one of my favorite interviews, and he's been a legend, for 60 years in this movement, liberty, freedom. And he's like, I'm all good. I'm all fine with that phrase, the greater good for the greater number. But what is the most ideal way to go towards that? And it's individualism. It's honoring the individual and individual rights first and foremost. And when people are honoring themselves, then they can come together in a collective. I mean, we're in a collective right now. It's 3 of us, and come together and relate in that way, as opposed to whoever, typically in collectivism, it's whoever holds the most influence and power within the collective determines what everyone else within the collective should do, whether it's a president, whether it's a mom, a dad, whatever. And so in some cases, I get it. Like, you're 5 years old, like your parents are gonna, decide certain things for you. But back to what you were saying initially, people lack discernment and nuance. And again, it comes back to psychology. Like we're kind of living in like a post-psychological, post-philosophical world. Like, do people really understand the psyche and the architecture of the psyche? Do they understand these things deeply about themselves? What philosophy is at the root of their living? And if you don't have a philosophy, our messed up world is going to project it onto you. But I can tell you how many times I saw on social media, like, especially when major events happen and you have to pick a side right away, whether it's Israel, Palestine issue, which is very complicated things. Like, how many people, because I actually have like a pastime where I like observing communication on social media. Like, I don't go on people's posts and argue if I disagree with them. I'm like, they have a view, cool. I have better things to do with my time than start arguing with strangers on other people's posts. Now, some people might like that. That might be a value of theirs. Maybe they have some lessons they need to learn, but that's just not my thing. But I like to observe because human behavior, human motivation, communication is important to me. And so I probably had seen over 100 times people go, I can't believe I ever believed anything you've ever said. Unfollow. And I'm like, okay, here's this individual, intelligent, sharing information that probably has impacted this one person's life. But because they maybe did a post on Free Palestine or what's happening in Palestine, everything that happened before, all the knowledge and all the wisdom that they shared just goes out the window. And like, I think it's ridiculous. But the question is, why? Why is that happening? Is there such a deep vulnerability within a person that they can't sit with, they can't navigate and hold, that they go right into like attack and judgment and dismissal? That's usually what's happening, as opposed to, I like what this person says a lot of the time. I don't really agree with them in that. But that's life. I don't have one single person that I know in all my years investigating and researching where I'm like, I agree with everything they say. This is my mentor. I shall never disagree with them. Like, I have people who I think are brilliant and who are mentors to me, intellectual mentors. And I don't agree with some of the stuff they stand for, or my area of research and my area of understanding and my intuition and the conclusions I come to, I align with more. But like, you have to, again, humility. Like, I don't know everything. I'm curious. That's at the baseline of who I am. Other people have to deal with who they are and figure out, why am I responding this way? Why am I getting so triggered? Like you have to be curious. Like when I get triggered, I check myself. Okay, what's going on? What was triggered in me? Why did I feel this need to like attack someone or even in my head? Like, I mean, in the past, I might be like, you freaking idiot, like you're so stupid, like, you know, and I'm like, why am I doing that? And this is why I'm also really into human design and things like that that make you understand like your uniqueness. It's another tool that could support you in how you communicate and how you make your decisions. Like I learned a long time ago, if I'm really feeling really emotional about something, I need to chill. It is not the time to make the phone call, to send a text, to respond, because emotional intelligence happens over time. It's not in the moment in triggered reactions.
Yeah.
You know, sure, you might have to react, and then you get data, and you come back, and you self-reflect, and you go, huh, I just did that thing or said that thing. Why? And then maybe next time you evolve and you shift your behavior. But like what I do often actually, if I feel a big charge, I might take out my phone and write my response, or that I might want to share with someone, and I write 8 paragraphs, and then I put my phone away and I go live my life for like a day or two, and then I come back to it and I go, and again, because I'm talking about from a human design standpoint, I have an emotional authority. I'm supposed to live out my emotional wave and not make decisions at the height or low of my wave. So then I come back to my phone and I go, ooh, okay, I'm deleting 70% of that. Then I'm going to reword that in a way that is more neutral, and maybe I'll send that. But most of the time, I don't send anything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you go, this is not coming from a rational, grounded place. Like I don't need to respond to this. So again, there's a great quote by Viktor Frankl. It's one of my favorite quotes, and I want to find it. I think it's between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space lies our ability to choose. And in that lies our freedom. Okay. Like I'm butchering the quote, but it's something like that. So we're constantly receiving stimuli in our environment. And are we reacting from these conditioned places? Or hopefully, do we have enough self-awareness and capacity within our nervous systems to go, hold up 1 second. I just took in some data that's completely new that challenges my entrenched belief system. And I'm feeling something inside of me. And I feel this contraction and this anger, and I'm getting hot. And I feel like do you have the ability to just take some time and be with that, as opposed to like just reacting immediately and doing the same thing that you've done for decades of your life? Or at some point, you need to shift the behavior, and then maybe you can come to a new place of understanding and then react or respond in a much more conscious way and communicate more consciously. And I think that's what we're dealing with in this world, is you have people that are just reacting and responding, and then they're reacting and responding. And just like, I always have this image of like, in the movies, like the nuclear holocaust that you see with like the video, like war games, like bombs just going across, the world. And it's like, that's what we see. And when we observe people in their relationships, and even with us often, like I'm by no means am like some like Zen master of like communication. I think I'm pretty good, but I have my moments. Ask Sophie, where I can get really defensive and be a little condescending at times. But what do we do with that? Do we have the ability to self-reflect? Do we have the ability to take responsibility? Do we have the ability to learn? And then go, maybe next time when this stimulus occurs, I hope that I'm going to respond in a different way. So this all relates to speaking your truth. This all relates to being in the online sphere and sharing things. Like if you put yourself out there, people will react. More often than that, they're going to react unconsciously. Then what do you do with that?
Yeah.
It is the responsibility of the so-called more conscious person, the more self-aware person, to not get sucked in and to check themselves and to either not communicate, or to communicate in a way that may help neutralize a situation. Like I didn't post a black square, okay, in 2020.
Me
I
neither.
that day posting testimonials of human design readings people had with me. And I had people come into my inbox, one person specifically, who went off on me. How dare you not post a black square? And how dare you, not do this? Like you're talking about yourself. And like, okay, of course, immediately I had a part of me, because I can be very like my innate thing is defensive. Like, don't you dare come at me. I will end you. Like, I have that part of me. It's like, no, homie, don't play that. You know what I mean? Like, we're not doing that. But over time, I've learned, okay, what's happening here? I know this person. I had to sit with it. And then I go, how can I communicate in a way that this person will understand? And so it took 2 messages to this person in a way that I thought was pretty conscious and healthy. And then this person started apologizing to me for how they came across from a reactive place, not like an emotionally intelligent place. And so it's your responsibility on how you then react to unconscious behavior, or else there's no difference. Like,
Do you remember what you responded, or a paraphrase?
I would have to go back into my message thread and see. I don't know if it was something human design related to, because I knew this person knew human design. There was something, but it was like, I mean, it was still driven from a place like, don't F with me, okay? Like just that knowing of like, I'm gonna set a boundary and I'm gonna be very clear. But how do you set a boundary? What's the energy behind the boundary? How do you communicate that? What language do you use? And again, this is cultivated over time. 10, 15 years ago, I did not have this ability. So again, going back to the beginning of this conversation, you have to be willing to mess up. You have to be willing for things to get messy. You have to be willing for relationships to potentially dissolve.
Mm-hmm.
Because what is the foundation of your relationships? I mean, we think about 2020 and like, there are people who had maybe shared certain beliefs about questioning the narrative, but no one in their entire friend group or their entire family shared their beliefs. And then they didn't even talk about it. And they're living in this world of like, what is going on? Feeling extremely alone. And that's one of the reasons why, we held our gatherings. We wanted to build community because I knew this was happening. I knew people were being ostracized. Even if they just said one thing, they were being ostracized by their friends and their family. One of my dear friends is a jazz musician. He was in a relationship for 11 years, and him and his girlfriend for 11 years had different views, and that relationship ended. And he was in the jazz community. He was on a WhatsApp thread with like 60 people in the LA jazz scene. And he posted one article about questioning masks. And everyone ostracized him. Best friends of 20 years that he played music with for years completely nixed him from their lives.
Yeah.
And then he comes to our gatherings with 50 to 100 people of like, wait, what? There are other people that share my views. This is great. I had someone who came to one of these gatherings that was like crying. They went, I haven't hugged anyone in 6 months. You know what I mean? And so like, but it takes the courage, like for my friend, the courage to share something, to stand for something. But when you do that, it's not going to be all roses and butterflies. You may, like, especially when we think about the zeitgeist of that time, like 2020. I mean, people forget, and especially like in New York City or LA or certain environments, from a socio-political standpoint, things were nuts.
Yeah.
And so you do it in that environment, and then you lose friends, you lose family, you lose a relationship. But from a bird's eye view, it's all for your greater good. It's all for your evolution to move closer and closer to that person that you're born to be. And so if you don't honor yourself, you're delaying that process. And life is about growth. It's not about everything being easy. And so do hard things and see if you can navigate that, and see if you can face that and handle that.
Yeah, for sure. I know a lot of my clients, specifically, just going back to GNM for a moment, so many conflicts around friends and family, relationships during that COVID era. And there's still fallout from that about their decision to, get or not get a vaccine, things around that topic, around mask wearing, or around like, oh, you can't come to your sister's wedding if you don't get the jab. And then, I mean, it was breaking families apart. And so people, of course, experienced a lot of psychobiological conflicts around this theme, around perhaps taking a stand and then losing people in their life. And I think that I just want to, share with all of our listeners, that's a really, like what Yerasimos just shared, it's not easy. Like that's a really big transition that it takes a lot of courage. It can have impact, like experiencing psychobiological conflicts from that. And I think that that's something that a lot of people are still working through. Because I think, and for me included, a lot of times we base our okayness on our relationships with other people. Like, I need my parents to love and accept me to feel okay, or I need this friend to like me and be happy with me and validate me for me to be okay. Or, we're giving our power away because we're requiring things from these other people in our life in order for us to have a sense of okayness. And I find I mean, of course, we need people, we need community. I'm not diminishing that. But I think a lot of people are stuck in this wanting to, like, they want to access that greater level of personal freedom that comes through taking radical responsibility. But I think they're not quite sure how to get there because it feels so life and death at times from a biological perspective, certainly, to have your family kind of disown you. So I guess what would you share to people who are navigating situations like that? Oh, I also see this a lot with co-parenting situations where the parents are not together anymore and then, making certain decisions for the kids that maybe their former partner does not agree with, or even if they're still in a partnership and they're, not agreeing on certain things about, even health related things with how to raise the kid or what, kind of worldview to raise the kid in, and just all of that. So yeah, if you had one thing that you could share with people who are in the midst, in the messiness of this journey and they want to access that higher level of personal freedom, what would you share to them with them?
It's so individual, because I for some people, maybe you don't need to talk about certain things. Maybe you don't need it to the certain degree. Maybe you can relate to someone in a certain way. Maybe you have other people in your life that you get deep on and talk about all these different subjects. Now I have such compassion for, the co-parenting or even just like being with someone that shares completely different views. It's not something that I have personal experience with. My wife and I are on the same page. We don't have children right now. And so I feel for people in that. And, there's legal things that you have to navigate as well. Like if you have children or if you're divorced and like, if one person's really hardcore, they can go to the courts and say things. And obviously like people who question the allopathic model, let alone question, germs and vaccines, that's tough, so I think all I would say is trust yourself, as best as you can to make the decisions that are the most ideal for you. Your path is your own path. No two paths are the same. And so, and pay attention. Like if you're constantly getting this like nudge to like do something, say something, and it doesn't leave you, it's probably a sign that something needs to happen. Like you may need to have that conversation. You may need to communicate your needs and assert yourself in a certain way. So yeah, like it's very individual, and you have to figure it out. But at some point, like again, like what's the cost of not honoring yourself? What's the cost continuing to people please? What's the cost of continuing to remain submissive? And again, to continue on things I said before, like you can keep kicking the can down the road, but at some point you need to deal with life. And we all have a life. We've all made certain choices up until this point. Our life is, you can say, outside of some certain things, maybe out of our control, our life is an amalgamation of every choice that we've made. And so if we entered into a relationship unconsciously or ignorantly, and then new things come to light, you have to deal with that. Run away from reality. So
yeah,
I'm sorry, but like you might have to deal with some pain and suffering and anxiety and confusion and uncertainty, which is a whole nother subject. This idea of like certainty versus uncertainty. And to be with uncertainty is deeply vulnerable. And do people have the capacity for that? And this relates to what we said before about certainty, like the arguing and like the convincing others. Like I have to be certain. I need to let them know that I'm certain and that I'm right, because what if I'm not? Like even for me as someone who has pretty strong convictions and I share the things I share, I try to have a little flavor of like, hey, I could be wrong. I might not have the answers. Up until this point, this seems to make sense, but like I could be wrong. And then do you communicate in that way as well? Like when you're having dialogues?
Yeah. So
So
actually on that point there, I wanted to ask about, just for you to share some of your thoughts about dogmatism within the GNM community. How can, for those of our listeners who, are interested in learning more about GNM and this makes sense to them and they've kind of adopted this paradigm as their predominant way of viewing health in the body, how can they and we continue to guard against falling into the narrative that like, oh, this is it, kind of blinders on, only what Dr. Hammer said. That's like, the Bible or whatever. And yeah, I guess kind of guard against going falling into the trap of dogmatic thinking, even within this very beautiful paradigm.
listen, Dr. Hammer was one man, okay? A brilliant man who has come up with some discoveries. And he doesn't have the answer to every single question in the world. He's not alive now. He hasn't been alive for however many years. There are things going on. There are technological advances. There are things that we maybe don't have answers to just yet. There's still mystery. Like, can you hold space for the mystery of maybe GNM doesn't answer every single question about every single thing? And like I say with other, let's say, systems that I'm into, people have lived pretty incredible lives and healthy lives and vital lives, and not know any of this stuff.
Right.
So like, chill. Like, you know what I mean? Like on some level, like chill. Like you have some knowledge. It's cool. Like, how do you share it? Oh, this is some cool stuff. Like, can you keep a lightness to yourself and to life? Can you not take yourself so seriously? Also, like that's just been kind of like a ruling element of my life. Like I get into deep things, but I like to keep things light and humorous. And so like you need to, again, self-awareness and self-knowledge. Like, are you getting too serious? Are you getting dogmatic? Is it like almost like a religious conviction of like Dr. Hammer is the leader and he knows all answers to everything and everyone else is, I can't think of the word right now, but like I think you know what I'm trying to say. Like he's the only one that answers.
Yeah.
So, again, it's like it comes back to you and personal responsibility and self-awareness and going like, just check yourself. Like it's a beautiful system of understanding our physiology. And maybe not everyone's ready for it. Maybe not everyone is meant to know this in this lifetime. So live your life, lead by example, understand that not everyone's going to get it, understand that not everyone needs to know it. There are other people out there doing things that don't relate to GNM that still help people. you know what I mean? So, and let's be real. Like the GNM community isn't a model for like conscious communication. Everyone's so aware. I mean, there's infighting within the GNM community. Of like, well, you didn't study with Dr. Hammer, so you shouldn't even be talking about this stuff. You know what I mean? So it's like we're still human beings at the end of the day. No one has it all figured out. No one's perfect. No one is like the most conscious, healthy, emotionally intelligent person in every single moment. Like, just check yourself. But again, you have to go through it. You might need to be dogmatic about it. And then you go through this thing and you say certain things and you respond to certain people and then you get feedback and you go, okay, I need to chill. But yeah, no one system or one person has the answer to everything. The world is way more complex. Who we are as individuals, who we are historically, what all this is way more complex and nuanced. So if the system works for you, if the knowledge works for you, apply it into your life and do your thing. Not everyone's going to be into it. And for certain people at certain stages of their lives, they might be somewhere else. Like if an individual look like that, let's say is really into GNM right now, you got to ask yourself and look in the mirror. If someone shared this knowledge with me 15 years ago, would I be reacting the same way? You know what I mean? Like, and
Right.
current iteration of someone who's really open to this, maybe in a previous phase of your life, you would have been the person being like, you're crazy. What are you talking about? That germs aren't, pathogenic. So like you're where you're at and other people are where they're at. So can you have the compassion, humility, and understanding to go, listen, like we're not all meant to believe the same things at the same time.
Yeah. Well, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but I wanted to ask one more question before we wrap up. Um, for all our listeners and for this, whole discussion that we've been having today, for anyone who is, has been questioning things, but again is kind of scared or nervous or anxious about kind of taking those first steps. Do you have any like just last words of advice or tips to kind of, dip your toe in, like you've been saying, or just to kind of start that ball rolling?
Well, I'm gonna steal this from Nike. Just do it. Like like you can't wait for everything to be perfect and for
Mm,
you to be super conscious and super aware and super healthy and super whatever before you take action in your life.
yeah.
Like the growth happens from the doing. Like you put yourself out there in the world and then you have to face what comes back at you and adjust and course correct and self-reflect and then go back out there into the world and then receive data from the external world and from your friends and from your family and then take it in and self-reflect and then continue this process. Like there's no better time than now to continue the process of evolution. Take the next step. The next step will lead you to the next step, which leads you to the next step. But if you're sitting there twiddling your thumbs, I'm not ready, I'm not perfect, I don't know everything there is to know. Like I was someone who used to like hoard knowledge in my life. And because my mentors were people where I go, well, I'm not them. I don't know everything that they know. So I can't share
Mhm.
anything because I'm not them. And it's like
Yeah.
they're where they're at on their journey or like one or two rungs up the ladder. And so they're speaking to me now where I'm at. There are millions upon millions of people that don't know anything that you know. And so you don't need to be the person that you're looking up to or that's your mentor in order to impact and
Mhm.
change people's lives. You're here at this
Mm,
stage of your life to support and educate the people that maybe, were you 5 years ago or 2 years ago. And this is the pattern in the cycle of life. And so you almost have to like let go of this perfectionism and this desire to like know everything before you can do anything. And that was me for a bit in my life. And then at some point I went, listen, I have some knowledge, I have some wisdom, I have some life experience. Like, let me share it
mhm.
and see what comes from it. So, just do it and then figure it out from there. And also, hopefully, you have community. Obviously, people in your world, um, you have friends that you can talk to about this stuff. Oh, hey, listen, I just did a post on the internet or on social media, and like, my cousin just yelled at me, or my mom was like, "What are you doing posting that stuff?" And then like you share, and this is where you have community, where people can hold space for you, and you don't just have to suffer in silence or try to figure it all out on your own. Um, and then ultimately you're gonna figure out like, is this something I want to do? Like I said back earlier, like you may post a few things and go, oh no, this isn't for me. And that's fine too. Like
Mhm.
you're not gonna know unless you take that step, unless you do something. Like I'm at a place now where it's like, listen, Joel and I have a platform. We have a podcast. I rarely post and share a bunch of other things. I'm like, I have a podcast. If you're into this stuff, cool, watch it. Like I don't need to sit there posting 24/7 about things. Me, that's just where I'm at. I like my life that I've built and curated. It's not a priority for me anymore. Like we've built something. I mean, an individual can go to hereforthetruth.com and we have 200 and like 15 plus episodes on a whole host of conversations and subjects that if you're curious and you're open and you have an active mind willing to grapple with things and challenge your belief systems, and there's so much stuff there to last you years, so like I'm doing my part to go, hey, here's some stuff. If you're into it, cool. If you're not, you're not.
Yeah. Well, awesome. It's been so great having you on today, Yerasimos. So many great conversations and, rabbit trails. And, I just really love the theme of this conversation. It was really great having you. And yeah, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I mean, I really love talking about this stuff, and it's an exciting time to be alive.
That's an understatement.
A lot of conventional paradigms are crumbling, and we're in this new place now of like what comes next. And I actually think that the world wasn't ready for Dr. Hammer's knowledge. 2020 had to happen.
Yeah.
A virus needed to be, released into the world, and the media talking about it 24/7 for people to go, there's a next stage. There's a new level of understanding that I think we can get to. And I think that's why this information, this knowledge is getting more and more popular. Obviously, it's not neat. It's the alternative to the alternative. I wouldn't say it's like in any sort of mainstream, whether in the alternative world or not. But I'm seeing it. I'm seeing people be open to this knowledge. And when they take this knowledge and they apply it to their lives and they see it, that's where it really is. And that's the coolest part. And that's how it was for me. And I'm going to be talking about my personal experiences with GNM in Austin with you fine people.
Yeah, we're so excited for that. And thank you so much for coming on. And guys, everyone listening, definitely check out his podcast, Here for the Truth. A lot of great stuff on there, including some episodes about GNM specifically. So definitely make sure to check that out. And Yerasimos, thanks so much for being here today. It was a really great conversation.
Thank you. Wish you both the best.
We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. We appreciate you being here.
If you would like some additional support in navigating your health symptoms, we both provide coaching services from a German New Medicine perspective.
Our Instagram handles and personal websites are linked in the podcast description.